I think a lot about discourse these days, how communication happens. And when there's good communication, you build community. That's what it's no accident those two words have the same root. You're communing.
Welcome to the Road Home Podcast with Ethan Nichtern. Join Ethan as he and his guests explore the Buddhist path as it relates to art, culture, activism, politics, Western psychology, and more. If you'd like to support Ethan's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Ethan.
Hi, everybody. This is Ethan Nichtern for the Road Home Podcast, and decided to have a repeat guest. The better podcasts have repeat guests all the time. So even though it feels slightly lazy in terms of inviting people, it also feels just like we get to continue conversations. And what is a podcast anyway, except just kind of listening to other people talk about stuff so you don't have to be alone with yourself while you're going through your day. So I invited David Nichtern, my father, back onto the podcast. And always great to talk to David. If I can keep him on topic, things go pretty well. If I cannot keep him on topic, things go very well. But I still try regardless. David, how are you?
Well, I am excellent at the moment, because the illusion I'm currently working with is being in Maui for the Ram Dass and Krishna Das minus Ram Dass retreat with dear old friends, regathering, some great music, right on the beach. So the illusion is good right at the moment. Yeah.
If Ram Dass was there, it would definitely be an illusion, right?
Well, that's interesting, and he's worth a good mention as being. When I said mention, I thought of mensch, which is too small a word to describe what he is, but it is part of what he is. He was so caring for people here.
Yeah.
He was so generous and so kind and so accommodating, really. It was a model for somebody really making themselves available in a bodhisattva kind of way. So just hats off to Ram Dass and thanking him for creating this legacy, which we can continue on gathering as a community together. So it's a very, very, very nice thing to do after coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and also his great foundation and the sort of resources of the work that he harvested also sponsor the Be Here Now Network, sponsor this podcast. So lots of reasons to be thankful for him, his presence, and example.
And also the Raghu and KD and the whole team at Be Here Now, too numerous to mention, but thanking them for sponsoring yours and my podcast. So that gave us a nice platform to work with, and I think the general spirit of it is pretty positive in terms of trying to get some kind of good message out to people, or sometimes, at least trying to be supportive and helpful to people who are in some kind of spiritual journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could, can you tell me how you are, and distinct from the fact that you get to be in Maui and I'm back in Brooklyn and it's, 41 degrees and gray here and the sun is setting because it's 4:30.
Well, so I'll give a koan to the audience. When it's neither too hot nor too cold, what is it? And for how long?
It's San Francisco. It's the Bay Area, maybe. No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's the beauty of our practice, Ethan, is as you've been iterating your wonderful Monday night and soon to be Monday and Tuesday night classes, a year-long Buddhist studies course, is how weaving in, noticing, like last night at your class, I noticed weaving in, noticing our own mind as part of the equation that's going on, and being able to kind of from that position, so we don't just simply take our projections to be reality.
Yeah.
You know.
So how does
you asked me though? You asked me other than that, how am I? That's what I'm saying is the flickering that I experience only minimally has to do with what's going on outside.
Right. So how is your mind? How's your relationship to your mind?
Well, that's really it's a fair question because I remember there's a particular teacher who I won't specifically mention, but was a Zen student, and he said after 30 years, he asked the older guys and girls, what have you accomplished with those 30 years of this intensive practice? And one of them said to him, well, not much, just maybe a little calmer, a little more equanimity, a little more kind. And the way he took that information was, oh, okay, well, this is not a good track because after 30 years, that's all this person can say. I took it differently, even when the person was telling the story. So I think, my mind is, I'm going to go on record as saying it's workable, but probably no less dramatic than it ever was. It's a comedy writer, it's a tragedy writer, and it's also writes musical comedy.
Right. Yeah. Well, at least you have made a skill out of it, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Aren't we the only species that narrates our existence? Do you think that's true?
Well, we're the only species that speaks in a language that we can know. I mean, I live with 2 cats now, and one is very chill. His name is Arlo. The other seems like a nervous old Jew in a cute black cat's body. It seems like he's been through some trauma earlier and just kind of nervous. And they don't seem to be narrating, but they do seem to be watching and observing. And you do wonder if there's discursive thought or storyline or meta-analysis going on, because there's definitely a lot in there. I'm not sure, but they don't have the language to express their narration to us.
A lot of what you talked about really, in terms of your class last night, which I loved and I listened to, was on Dharma and politics. A lot of it is what kind of narratives we're creating, and also the tone, the mood ring of it. And the fact that recognizing that we're basically using our imagination so intensively to just walk down the street. My book, Awakening from the Daydream, that realization that we're just daydreaming all the time.
Yeah.
And you never even see an awakened being, really. You see flickers of awakening. You see people who have some relationship to some kind of, presence. But most of the time we're really, as what did you call it in your book? You said samsara, tourists or something like that?
Yeah, I talked about the sort of the notion of a samsaric being in Tibetan being drowa, which literally means like always on the go, right? So yeah, the
wandering,
sort of the wanderer, the tourist, like the person who cannot land at home. Yeah,
that's I hope that's a good way for people to think about these things. There isn't, in my mind, yet a lot of clarity around this topic amongst people who decide they want to meditate mainly so that they can achieve more kind of relaxed or better sleep or something like that. Actually, the texture of their mind being something that is interesting in itself and workable in itself, and even maybe challenging to work with. And the more challenging it gets doesn't mean you're rowing in the wrong direction.
Right.
Which is, I think, a big, thing to it's a provocative thing to introduce into the combo.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you might not see fully enlightened beings, although, you could definitely look at that as a broad spectrum. But I do think we're living in a time, and this is why you hear me speak out against false equivalence a lot, where there seem to be a lot of varying degrees of worldviews that are based on care for others versus individualism, right? And sort of that seems there's a real difference there. And I would say there's a general relationship between awareness of interdependence and care for others and being closer to the awakened kind of compassion. And I do think we're living in a time where there's almost these backlashes against kind of, even viewing the world that way, like that's considered unrealistic or even somehow harmful.
Yeah.
And,
harmful. That's mind blowing, isn't it? That it's considered harmful.
Yeah. I mean, but if you look at some of the theories that our world are based on, like if you buy into certain views of karma or cause and effect, you could arrive at the view, like if you believe that everybody just creates their own situation 100%, you would actually come to feel that helping another person or helping a group of people would be almost stopping them from having the opportunity to help themselves, and you can actually bend your mind into situations where you say, well, I can't give this person food or my ear or give them healthcare because it's going to hurt them if somebody else is helping them.
I think of that as almost Darwinian. I don't know if that's the right word. I think you probably have a better word for it, but it's like survival of the fittest. And so the best compassionate thing you can do is train somebody to be the fittest.
Yeah. And to convince yourself that not only to convince yourself that that's the way of the world, but that somehow that's compassion. I think the righteousness of that perspective goes really far. But I think we're talking about something else when we talk about kind of narrating our own experience from the standpoint of storyline. I would say there's people who we all have that narration, and like I have a narrator. Let's call him Phil. No, I don't know what my narrator's name would be. But I would say that the practice has made me. Sometimes you need a counterexample of this, where you see people who, whatever information they receive from other beings, whatever information they receive from the world, it is instantly fed into and co-opted by the internal script writer, like very quickly. Like there's not a curiosity about like, oh, what's going on here? Or I didn't expect that to happen, or this is a new experience, or this is a new person, or new being. And some people have that narrator going on, but are a little bit more, maybe we would use the term available to being surprised out of their narrative a little bit.
Yeah. And of course, if we're doing what we talk about doing, we should be happy when we're surprised and overturned. It's interesting, the whole notion of debate, which used to be part of the Buddhist tradition. I don't know if it is anymore, really. I'm not sure where. I guess still in the Gelugpa Buddhist tradition, they train that way, and some others, they have it. It might be interesting to instigate a Dharma Moon. What do you think? We could have debates, some kind of Dharma Moon debates, to contrast different perspectives, different points of views. And then at the end, it's not a question of winning the debate, but learning from each other.
Yeah, and you would ask each person, like, what did you learn from the other? Like that would be the finality of it,
Well, in the old days, the loser had to go study with the winner. That was the punishment.
Well, but my understanding in the Shedra style of debate is they would do this like clapping, right, with one hand atop the other and almost like moving past the other in a like give me some skin, like 1950s hipster style high five, from like Stand By Me, the River Phoenix and Stand By Me, like give me some skin. But that sliding, that slapping of the hands, which feels very violent, like when you make the point in the monastic debate in the Tibetan system, it would actually be a lifting up of the hand and then a slapping, and that what that would represent is basically a sense of like, if my views have been clear, may I have lifted beings out of the lower realms and then shut the door so that beings do not fall into those lower states of confusion.
Oh, that's the symbolism of that mudra?
That's what I heard from, I can't remember if I heard that from Bob Thurman or another scholar, adept scholar in that particular debate tradition. Other than that, I've just seen videos of the young monks doing it,
Right. Yeah. Well, and the whole notion of discourse. I know you're thinking about community. I think a lot about discourse these days, how communication happens. And when there's good communication, you build community. That's what it's no accident those two words have the same root. You're communing. So how rare it is that good communication is happening these days is, I don't know, maybe it was always that way. Is it possible it was always that way? It just seems really, really loud. The discourse, the discord seems very loud, strident right now, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look in the larger world, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's necessarily the media talks a lot about polarization, and people talking past each other, which isn't really what's happening to my mind, because when people can talk to each other, I think that actually happens more. I think it's that we have fewer and fewer arenas and practices for people actually talking to each other in a manner where power is not an obvious dynamic, So one, when you talk about receiving the news, right? I mean, that's really a one-way street, the news. You could say, well, there's different, editors and journalists making decisions, which is true, but they're not for example, they're not asking what we think the important issues are, nobody asked the American people if they wanted them to cover the death of Queen Elizabeth, but the news just decided. I thought this was the most fascinating example of am I tripping right now? Because literally the entire news media in a country that was founded on rejecting that particular royal family is now being told by the storytellers to mourn.
Yeah.
Not that I'm didn't feel a sense of, I'm not a monarchist, but it seemed like Queen Elizabeth was a pretty decent human and there's a mourning, but there wasn't a lot of conversation about some of us being it was what do you think about this? Oh, Americans are very sad about this. And it's we didn't choose that conversation, know? And then the other places we choose conversation are online social media. And those are kind of expressly designed not to be conversation spaces, right? Because it's really hard to insert advertising into a true conversation space, the algorithm has to function as sort of capturing attention, getting these sparks of spicy moments to happen, and then sliding, let me sell you something into it,
And Eth, what that made me think of right away is the ads, which I'm surprised they haven't done this on Saturday Night Live or something like that, a parody of the ads for pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Where they show these kind of goofy, happy people who have kind of serious colonitis or whatever they have. They have nosebleeds, their brains are turning into oatmeal. And yet they're on these pills and they look very happy. And then at the end of it, this voice comes on and tells you all the downsides of it, as if nobody's listening to that. If you have this symptom, you have to rush to the hospital, and it's just almost that encapsulates both sides of the kind of promise and the sheer samsaric dimension of our culture. Yeah, those ads, and the fact that nobody's looking at the cause of any of those things in a causal way, but here's a pill you can take. And not only that, the pill has really got a lot of harmful effects. So we by law, somebody goofed up and we have to tell them to you, but we'll pretend we're just sort of chanting or something like that. Yeah, right.
I think they did that back in the day. I think Saturday Night Live did that with a product called the Happy Fun Ball or Super Happy Fun Ball.
They did.
Where it was just a ball and then kids playing with the ball, having fun. And then the pharmaceutical, admonition or warning voice came in. It's like,
Yeah.
super happy fun ball should not be played with in direct sunlight. Do not taunt super happy fun ball. Like, it was just this list of like things not to do.
Good. They did it already.
But
That's funny.
yeah, I think it was called super. I'm gonna have to go back to YouTube to.
Right.
That's how I know I'm aging. I can't remember old Saturday Night Live skits anymore. Never mind people's names I used to be friends with.
I have no good news in that regard. Ethan.
Yeah, I'm just gonna play more Sudoku.
Just gets worse. Although I saw a hand exercise that you can do on Instagram that supposedly helps your neuroplasticity work.
Oh, cool.
But
Yeah.
you can. That's an interesting topic. Actually, since we're talking about mind, the part of your mind that is kind of the organ recital part of the mind, which is called the brain, is quite interesting to correlate the brain and the mind, isn't it? I mean, Buddhists have started doing that in the last 30 years or so, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Brain and mind. What's the difference? What do they have in common? What's the overlay? What do you think about brain and mind? What would you say if somebody said,
All
what's the
right,
difference?
we can loop out to this. I want to get back to this question of communication and conversation and community. But, I would say the place we experience the mind most directly is the brain. Although, I think from a somatic standpoint, the mind would be diffused throughout our physical experience and would be anchored in all of the sense perceptions, including brain function, thought, etc. But the brain would be part of the body from a Buddhist standpoint, which the mind experiences itself. But in Western science, there's no real room for the idea of consciousness, and the scientific materialists are pretty lazy and reductionist on this front. They just say, well, we can't find mind by looking at the physical experience, even though the whole it's basically like saying I can't find Toronto and Denver. It's like that. It's defined. It's not defined as being an experience that's reducible to physical, although our experience of it runs completely through our physical sense of embodiment, right? So brain would be material. It's body, but it's the part that links the most directly to our sense of thought, cognition, consciousness.
Well, of course, when you get to I'm going to be 75 in 3 months, Heath. I don't know if you thought about that, but it crept up on me.
What do you want to do for your birthday?
Well, we should do something just to take note of it, but I haven't really tuned into it.
What do you want listeners to do for your birthday?
Practice.
Okay. Good.
Okay. If you're out there and you're listening and you have a spiritual journey going on, actually do the practice. And just send me your daily record of your practice for a birthday present.
So in February of 2023, for his 75th birthday, David would like everybody listening to email him a JPEG record. Of or a JPEG of yourself meditating.
Yeah, well, that'd be amazing. And not that different people think meditation is some kind of key thing to do that will help the whole situation, and people have their different perspectives on it. I know some people who think it's a complete bypass. Some of my friends in LA, I was just in LA. Wait. Let's say
this again. Some of my friends in Los Angeles,
yeah,
which some would say is an entire region of America founded on bypassing discomfort, would say that meditation practice is a bypass.
Yeah, I guess I get in the sense that they might be more into, psychology or some kind of more Western style of like actually getting into your stuff. Even
though many Western psychologists are advocates of meditation, like that doesn't feel like an either or to me.
Well, yeah, these days that's true. That's true. I think it's more so than it used to be. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. It's just I was going to say at 75, approaching 75, I do sort of contemplate, what could be variations that could happen to my consciousness through the process of aging that I may not be able to meditate my way through. And, talking about Ram Dass, a perfect example here at Maui, had a stroke, and it changed his whole way of communicating and his whole way of perceiving. And also it was sort of a roadmap a little bit. He said, I'm a scout for the rest of you, because he went, he was older, so he went down that road.
Right.
But, watching a guy as loquacious as that, and, who also knows what loquacious means, get to the point where literally uttering a word or two, like by the end, he would just chant, I am loving awareness.
Right.
And there was no more of that kind of like very articulated, highly
loquacious
loquacity, and but one thinks, well, okay, this could easily happen to me. As my father, your grandfather, had Parkinson's disease that completely on a dime changed his whole way of being around. And, it's something you think about more. Obviously, as Buddhists, we're trained to think about it early. You're supposed to get the early warning on aging and old age, sickness, and death, right? But then it actually happens to you, and then you take it kind of probably a little bit more. It begins to become a little more of a personal, direct contemplation about what's going to happen to me, to myself, such as it is. And I notice people go, maybe at this age, they start going up or down a little bit. They also get tired of living. They're bored with the whole thing. They've seen a lot of stuff. It's just, that again. They're
cynical.
It's cynical, but also dried up. So, I do the Qigong practice and I do the meditation to stay moist. I mean, if I really was going to give a definition of my practice at this point, it's to stay moist, lubricated.
What about body lotion?
Well, we won't get into that here because that's too personal.
To keep your skin moist, so you don't dry up and crack. You know what I'm saying.
What father and son talk to each other like this, Eve?
So basically, like, I actually, my best friend from college, Jeff, who's a filmmaker in Los Angeles, actually. So I have friends who aren't bypassing in their great city of Los Angeles. So no need to diss that. But he did a whole commentary on how uncomfortable it was in a meeting, some meeting, and this was during the Me Too movement. Somehow the word moist came up in a group meeting, and how uncomfortable just that word was to be uttered in space. So, but it is a word, you want your.
Well, and there's a lot of words these days that you just kind of put back into the dictionary they came out of. It's, and you and I are both writers and poets and songwriters, and we're looking for those cool juxtapositions of phrasing. But I think twice a lot these days before I open my big mouth.
Well, I love a croissant, and if my croissant's too dry, or if a person gets too dry, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about just kind of staying loose and supple with life.
Yeah, in Qigong, it probably almost wouldn't be inaccurate to say that the Qi has elements of air and energy, but there's some kind of water, like, Bruce Lee saying, be like water, is more than just a mental attitude. So just relating to the fluidity of mind, the fluidity of body, noticing as you age, you tend to sag a little bit. So, you can raise that back up. I happen to study with a teacher, Sat Han, who is saying the natural lifespan of human beings is 125. That's that's what we're supposed to live to. And then there are examples of people who live well beyond that. Now, that's not my target particularly, but at the same time, if I'm helpful, useful, if I'm being creative and have and I can sort of continue to contribute, then you go, well, then it makes good sense to stay moist for as long as you can.
Yeah. Well, an interesting question. That middle path between health and longevity, and at the same time wanting to, practice letting go. Because
Exactly.
there's a lot of people wishing they could live forever and maybe doing
Yeah.
kind of from the spectrum of unhealthy to insane.
Yeah.
The blood infusions from younger, healthier people seeming to be, to me, on the insane end of the spectrum, because you're actually, it feels vampirical, to actually take. So, yeah, that's an interesting Dharma conversation about keeping oneself healthy. And at the same time, I just started reading Pema Chodron's, How We Live is How We Die, which is her new book on the six bardos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's Pema. It's great that she's kind of tackling, classic, difficult, life and death material. So
she's well into her 80s at this point, right?
Yeah, but she seems I'll find a different word because I don't want to call Pema Chodron moist, but she seems supple,
Yeah, that's great. And of course, I don't know if people know this, but I don't even know if she knows this. I did try to get the word through, but we built our Dharma Moon 100-hour mindfulness meditation teacher training program on one chapter of one of her books is completely seminal to it, which is the one in Wisdom of No Escape on gentleness, precision, and letting go. Those three are the tripod of Dharma Moon teaching altogether. And you can use them against each other as counterpoint. You can synchronize them up. If you're too precise and not gentle enough, that's a certain kind of thing. If you're too gentle but not precise enough, that's a certain kind of thing. If you're gentle and precise, but there's a sense of holding tight to that formula, so those three to me are really seminal. And I'll just take this opportunity to thank Pema for, kind of putting her experience out there in a very organic way, and therefore touching a lot of hearts, a lot of minds, and continuing to do that. So just, definitely appreciate the amount of work that she's put into preserving the Dharma, and particularly the Dharma of Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yeah. Thank you, Pema.
There you go. Wherever you are.
Yeah. She's somewhere on this earth. Do you ever think that's weird that, like, unless somebody's dead, they're here? Those are really the only two. Like,
title.
Those are only your two. You're either gone or you're somewhere in the same physical space.
Oh, that's just perfect. Unless somebody's dead, they're here. Is it a country song? Is it what kind of song is it? Unless somebody's dead, they're here. Well, or where are they even when they are here? It's a funny thing because we keep thinking about people even when they're not here. I think about you all the time, obviously, and you're not here all the time. And then when we are here together, it's more intense, right? It's a little bit like a notch up in the thing, which brings us back to community. Yeah, being physically present with each other.
So this is what I wanted to talk to you about right before we were about to start. I'm thinking of community as a simple translation of the term Sangha. You were thinking it could be, or maybe couldn't. It could go either way. Maybe community did mean Sangha, maybe it didn't. But I do feel like, not that COVID is over. There's all these different other illnesses going on, but we're clearly, even before the pandemic, there are all these criticisms of Dharma communities. Sometimes they weren't super friendly. Sometimes they weren't super inclusive. I experienced different Dharma communities, the Interdependence Project, sometimes checking in with the Zen community, sometimes checking in with a Insight community, and then, Shambhala community being the core one. And that community really, Shambhala centers still exist on the local level to some degree. But so many people who are in that community kind of, it collapsed, as a global community that people had issues with, but it collapsed. And then kind of right as that was happening, there was also this intensified interest in Dharma community or Sangha. And then the pandemic hit, and so everybody started doing things online. Dharma Moon, kind of has blown up as this online Dharma training and, just kind of sometimes training and then sometimes hanging out with each other community, and entirely in that span of time. So now I do feel like, I'm not going to make any gaffes and say COVID is over. Like, please get your next booster shot and, continue to protect yourself and others. But we are starting to move into this post-pandemic world. And people really want community, and it feels like it's been lost and some people have never found it. And so how did the Dharma Moon community come about? We've talked about this a little bit, but I'm just wondering, because it could be, you could just view it as we started as doing these really well-run meditation teacher trainings, which I do highly recommend people check out if they're interested in that. But kind of out of that evolves a sense of a community, like people who care about each other, keep up with each other.
Definitely. Well, it arose organically out of the fact that this was happening. It was a picnic. It was a traveling feast for decades. That mindfulness meditation teacher training course I started doing it Om Yoga in the mid 90s. So for 25 years at least, that course, and it's evolved and it's been developed, some, of course, since then, with various other people contributing to that. And also, but it was just me going around and did various yoga studios and Kripalu, wherever, and so I was physically traveling 6 months a year, probably at that point. And then all of a sudden, and then we affiliated with Tibet House, which was a great thing. And we actually got Tibet House set up with a sound system. We were going to try to integrate music and, some kind of feasting and, a creative zone with it. And then we had our upcoming teacher training program coming up, and the pandemic slammed shut. It was not like a crossfade. It was a slam. And then I just talked to Beata over at Tibet House, and we said, we got to go online and do this, or we're out of business, and we're not doing it. And she said, I just leapt at it. She said, I have all the people around, just didn't hesitate about it. And we had, a group of people. It's worth mentioning Rebecca D'Onofrio, who's the program director at Dharma Moon, and she just jumped on board and kind of helped orchestrate and build it out. Very important. And a lot of other people just kind of, gosh, it just reminded me of the days I'm used to, where people, it's like a jam session. People just bring their instrument along and they play together. So I felt like it evolved out of a natural, organic thing. Fortunately, Zoom was already a thing. I don't know who orchestrated Zoom to be ready for a takeoff. Maybe Zoom orchestrated the pandemic. Zoom let the virus release. Here's a conspiracy theory, so that they could grow their company. You can't even kid around like that. I'm kidding. Okay, everybody.
I do. Wasn't there? There was a thing where several of the senators were briefed that the pandemic was coming and was going to be worse than we thought in maybe January or February, and did buy stock portfolios that I think included Zoom.
Oh my gosh.
I know there was a briefing of senators, I think that included the old Republican senator from Georgia.
We're so quick to imply, let's be clear about it. Zoom's a great company, and that's what's enabling us to have this conversation. But obviously, when anything good happens, I saw an AI on TV the other day, and the on Lisa Ling, that show that she has on CNN, and the AI just went and she just jumped because it was so lifelike.
Yeah,
and so everything that comes up is going to have the light and the dark side, and I think I can easily recognize both of those in myself. As like things which sort of you want optimize the benefit for yourself as a single person, which is the definition of ego, really, in a way, or greed. It's you want it to be good for you. You don't really care how it is for anybody else, and you don't even care how it really is, which is, as you've pointed out, interdependent. You're the guy who wrote the interdependence, the Declaration of Interdependence, which is you're the one who flipped, actually, in my humble opinion, DNA aside. Instead of talking about egolessness, you talked about the flip side of it. The same thing is interdependence, but it's so much more positive a way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm the first one to do that. I have talked about this when I was one of the teachers interviewed in the first issue. I was about to say episode, but issue of the Lion's Roar magazine. Talked about sort of why the Dharma speaks often in negating language. What isn't there? No self, no phenomenon, no permanence, etc. Right. Speaking in more affirmative language about what is there beyond misconception, and I think that's also why Chogyam Trungpa started with basic goodness rather than starting with dukkha, more affirmative language. And interdependence, I want to say, I wrote that from kind of an urban perspective, but I would say the first modern teacher to really emphasize that, although he called it interbeing, is Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh had a habit of taking basically every Buddhist teaching that was about it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, and starting with framing what is it? He does that with he calls the 5 precepts, the 5 mindfulness trainings. Yeah. And it's the care for life rather than refrain from taking life, right? It's the promoting conscious consumption rather than don't engage in intoxication or whatever.
Yeah.
So
you're right to credit him for that, and right there, with Pema as being a major broadcaster of the sort of the kinds of dharmas that are going to survive and do well.
Yeah,
because they're so human and they're so positive in their thrust. But it is true that there's some advantage sometimes of pulling the rug out, because people get very ensconced. You know what I mean? So impermanence is such a great contemplation to just let it be. It's not permanent.
Yeah,
that thing you're doing, it's not permanent. It doesn't exist substantially anywhere. It doesn't. So there's a benefit, I think, to both ways of talking about it, but. It's been mistaken for nihilism, as you're saying.
Yeah.
By a lot of people, including the Pope and people like that,
Yeah. I mean, it's been mistaken for nihilism. And also it's just how much positive, it's also a question of what works, So does our practice flourish in, with the sword of wisdom cutting through misconceptions, or does our practice flourish with the kind of loving kindness and validation, and it's some of both. I would say it's 80% validation, 20% cutting through. And, there's this term toxic positivity where it's all validation to the point where nothing gets cut through. And I don't know if it's nihilistic. It's just very, very harsh. It almost leads to a worldview of everything is empty if there's no self. What is there to look forward to, kind of? Where's the icing on the cake, kind of, or where's the cake? And
where's the cake? Yeah. It's sweet. I mean, and I hang out. What am I doing here in Maui, of all places? I'm playing kirtan with Krishnadas,
which is a very affirmative, right? There's not a lot of cutting through that happens there.
Well, he's unique in that way that he can be quite crusty and kind of, he's tough in a way, KD, but
the ceremony of kirtan is very,
the doctrine of it is just really, love, is, is love and a sense of connection and grace. They emphasize this element of grace, which is that you can try as hard as you want to get wherever you want to go. I mean, one thing that Katie says that if you're practicing, you could be like on a train that is heading towards the station and you're running on the train the opposite direction, you're still going to get to the station. There's some notion of grace, or maybe you could say higher powers, or things like that, which are it's not all you just managing and manipulating your consciousness to the point where it turns into something holistic. There's some sense of surrender, devotion. So I've been saying for years that their perspective here is more similar to us as Vajrayana practitioners in some sense than either of us is to the lower yanas. And that's, when they're talking about devotion and surrender, I have a reference point for that, that's not really talked about in Theravadan Buddhism and not really talked about in Mahayana that much. Right? And it's something I think about, Eth, because in our tradition, there is a link with living beings, that are teachers. So, for example, I feel graced by having met some of these great Tibetan masters of the last century and having a very strong sense of tasting what it's like when somebody is really accomplished and really realized, like firsthand. And that's been a marker in my path. So, and I think it's similar, like, KD met his guru, Neem Karoli Baba and Ram Dass, and they were just convinced that something beyond their small view was not only possible, but inevitable.
Yeah.
So it's heartwarming for me, and the people here are huggy, and they hug a lot, and they love each other, and and then they always have the Buddhist teachers here too, which was part of Ram Dass's generosity and also comprehensiveness. So right, like Jack Cornfield and Trudy Goodman are here this week. Sharon Salzberg's been here. Bob Thurman's been here, and then they also mix in some yoga for people who want to practice yoga. It's I think this kind of gathering is the bomb, actually. It would be good if the Buddhists opened up their house a little bit wider and included other traditions and other things and music. And, we're trying to do that a little bit, not just have it all be so hardcore.
Yeah.
More big Maha community. Yeah. Maha community, Mahasangha.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that does seem like it does feel like the other approach to Sangha, which is this sort of like closed house, that you have to enter and you have to, the Buddha did that, one, because he was kind of world avoidant and he really felt like the monastic Sangha had to be separated from the both the status structures and the desires, social structures of desire in the world. But it does create this sort of like not like otherizing, right? And it does feel like some kind of Dharma Sanghas. Like I would say this about Shambhala is that there was this sense of not like don't talk to anybody who's outside at all, but sort of like this is a separate thing. We don't mix, super easily with others. Yeah. We don't dilute the forms, like those things that you're talking about would have been considered some kind of dilution, I think, a lot of times in the Shambhala community.
I can tell you for sure it wasn't meant to be that way, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, although
that was not the vision of it that I got inspired by and tried to follow up on. What I'm doing now with Dharma Moon is much closer to what I understood. In fact, I mean, Trungpa Rinpoche said that the way the Dharma was going to spread in the West was through culture. Yeah. Through music and things like that. And I believe that, you gather people together and then, introduce the idea of some practices, but, and look, if you go deep into something, obviously it becomes a little more cloistered. That just isn't, if you're going to do a 3-year retreat, you don't do that with everybody on planet Earth. You do that with 12 people,
Yeah. And it's helpful in that sense to cloister, right? If you view it as a period of training, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even culturally, it's helpful. But, the big picture is so compelling these days, and the idea of interdependence. I'm so glad that you rebroadcast that message because, and you even hear Bill Clinton talking about interdependence. Remember that? He was talking about interdependence at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you go like, that would be a cool message for people to get out there. And it's not a woke, kind of cliched thing. It's like actually a true thing. And like what's happening when you said the pandemic is almost over, look at China with zero COVID policy, and all my dear friends in Japan, they're maxed out on COVID again. It's not over.
Yeah.
And, so the interdependent part would open people's hearts and minds if they could just see that. But it's a death blow to the ego in recognition of interdependence, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a death blow to the ego, and it's also a death blow to a lot of the ways that we're taught in the West or in just modern life, that the importance of the individual, and like you look like at somebody who's I think always was a somewhat complicated figure, has become a very complicated figure like Elon Musk. Like he's actually said, my worldview is individualism, and he wants politicians who promote that worldview. And you get what he's going for in the sense like that the individual can accomplish great things. And there's, I think some of the people, Thich Nhat Hanh was a great individual, but he's the one who's saying we're all interdependent. And I do think that worldview, that the individual above all else, it has very little to do with personal freedom or expression. In fact, the same people who promote individualism often are the ones who want to stop other ways of being individuals as well. And then and that's an interesting irony. But I do think that view
is a really good point.
The hyper importance of the individual, has to be, that view is highly problematic from a dharmic standpoint.
Well, so Ethan, you said something in your class last night that I thought was so seminal that and again, you may be reiterating somebody else's commentary on this, but it doesn't matter because you voiced it and articulated it, which is Buddhism doesn't have any commentary on democracy, because it wasn't fostered in democratic society for 2,000 years. Yeah. There were no democracies.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe you could say Greece, at that point, the Greek experiment was going on, but worldwide, it was so the fact that Buddhism wouldn't have a perspective, it does, as you mentioned, having a perspective on kind of enlightened leadership or ruling or whatever you want. But it doesn't really have any well thought out perspective on what democracy is or could or should be. And the people who are right now, we're at the edge, as you also mentioned, of, slippery slope into autocracy and oligarchy, and we see what it looks like. You can look all over the world and see what it looks like. And U.S. could look like that in 5 years, and everybody knows it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we took, I think what happened November 8th is we didn't go over the precipice. And I'd say we took like a slight step back, and I think we need to, keep doing that, but it's going to take a real, the thing that made me the most hopeful was youth participation was up.
Okay.
I think that would be the single biggest factor when you look at demographics. If people under 35 voted at the same rates that people over 65 vote, our entire political system, there'd be about 500 AOCs, and we can feel however we want to feel about that, but it would look very different. So that was a big step. But yeah, I mean, I do think there's an inherent connection between Buddhism and democracy, which is the belief that all beings possess the same potential and basic goodness, and therefore that leads to some sense of wanting to include everybody. Within that, there's different ways that the hierarchies need to be played out, right? There's different models of parenting. There's different models of running compassionate organizations. But that basic view that everybody's voice in some way needs to be heard and everybody needs to be valued within a community, I think is something that it would be.
And by the way, that can happen. That can happen in a monarchy too. That can and has happened in a monarchy. Monarchy doesn't necessarily mean like repression and it can gravitate towards that for sure.
Yeah, I think
you can see examples of tribal cultures and things like that where those things are in play, but there is a chief,
Yeah, well, those tend to be, yes, exactly. Those tend to be smaller. There tends to be bred into the principles of leadership. That's not it's not like Donald Trump was the head of any. It's a totally different. It's harvesting the wisdom of councils, etc. So there's a totally different. The chief figure or the queen or the king figure have a totally different training about them, like a totally different worldview. It's not this view of like, strongest guy gets to the top and then tells everybody else how it is, Yeah,
and there has to be a notion of service that's baked in, and compassion, and those have to be cultivated at the individual level for everybody. There's no way around it, and nobody can hold that for the whole group. It's like Atlas holding up the world. Everybody has to hold up a piece of it. I don't know where we're going, Eth. I think about you, and I think about Izzy, and I think about the future. And I think I probably won't be in it, in this form, So I think, I'm trying to like nudge the future a little bit in my own way.
What's your next book? Nudge the future.
With some of the, kind of powerful teachings that we have access to, that we've had access to, which help you tame your own mind for starters, and be a more compassionate person for seconds. And for thirds, really, really take off the shades and look directly at what it is,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end. I want to encourage everybody to check out dharmamoon.com, whether you're interested in our expanded year-long Buddhist studies program, whether you're, it's a really great mindfulness meditation teacher training. There's great open gatherings and talks. David's podcast, David's book, Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck, which with inflation is now making $1.50.
That making a buck is because that's how much a deer used to cost.
It's a pretty awful expression when you break that down.
That's where it came from. But also in that light, I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but on December 20th, there's an info session for your upcoming both year-long Buddhist studies course. We have 2 of them, and we're getting tremendous response to that. So if you just go to dharmamoon.com and check it out, there's that program, and then we have a teacher training program that starts in March. So we're trying to keep people getting onto the Dharma wheel and also going deeper, I would say, is kind of our goal. And it's been really fun to do it together, Eth. I've just, this kind of conversation, you just can't ask for life to get better than this as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you can go to the beach now.
Okay, we'll do.
I have to go to the grocery store and it's 41 degrees and cold. So
I'm kidding. It's too hot here. It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. It's horrible. You should have done this whole podcast like sipping a pina colada. Well, anyway, David Nichtern, thank you so much, and lots of love, and get home safe. Come to dinner with me and Izzy, and let her climb on top of you, and and we'll be back soon. That info session, I want to say there's one December 20th and one January 10th, both Tuesday nights, 3 weeks apart. The program begins at the end of January. So anyway,
and you can take the modules you can take 6-week modules without signing for the whole year. Everybody should know that, because that's a good option for somebody who wants to get their beak wet.
Yeah. Moist. Get their beak moist.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. We'll end on that note.
Okay. So for the Road Home podcast, this is Ethan Nichtern. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time.